sevens, welcome to your Monday math lesson. So on Friday we were talking about different types of shapes. So you had to identify and name shapes that had the same amount of sides and angles. So if I gave you a five-sided shape, this would be 5 sides and 5 angles. What were some of the shapes that fit into those categories? Well, you could have a parallelogram, because that has 5 sides, but it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 angles. So a lot of that worksheet was basically naming different types of shapes that you knew that fit into those categories. So it had to have the same amount of shapes or had the same amount of sides and angles. Now we're going to be applying those 2D shapes that we were talking about and using them for 3D shapes. So what we're going to be doing is reviewing nets. Nets are what make our 3D shapes. So if I gave you a net, that looked like this, well, it's not drawn very well, but if I gave you a net that looked like this, what kind of a shape would it make if I tried to fold it all up together? Well, this is where our knowledge of 3D shapes has to come into play. What kind of 3D shape has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares on each side? So each different side is made up of a square, and there's 6 of them all together. What shape can that make? It can make a cube. Now, how about some other nets? So let's also look at different types of shapes that can make a cube. So if I gave you a net like this, oh, this is not going to be big enough. And 1 and 2. Could this shape here make a cube? Well, let's look at our first characteristics. It has to have 6 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Yes, it does have 6 squares. So that right away tells me it's a cube. There is another characteristic, though, to having a cube net. And what I'm going to show you is, let's look at this shape right here. Will this shape here make a cube? Well, it does have 6 squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. However, we have to look at our characteristics of a cube. It has, when we look at a normal net for a cube, or the nets that we're used to seeing for a cube, it has a line of 4 squares and then 1 on each side. Because what happens is we fold these 4 squares together, and then there's a cube on each side to cover the sides. Because if I tried to fold this up, I would have 6 squares all around. But if I try to fold this shape up, so if I fold this together, so if I fold it, let's see, I'm going to try to draw this out. So I have 1 square here, 2, 3 is in the back here, and 4. Those 4 strips would create 1, 2, 3, 4. It would create the outsides of it, but it wouldn't create the sides. These sides here, 1 and 2 on this side, are going to be blank. That's why this net here has a square on each side, because that would create these 2 different sides here. This one here, it doesn't have a cube on this side, or it doesn't have a square on this side. So that means if I folded this up, I would just have 1, 2, 3, 4 squares, and one side would have a square, but the other would not. So this is where you have to really try to visualize to see what kind of nets will create a cube. Will it have a square on each side? Or will it just have a square on one side? Will some squares overlap? You have to kind of pay attention. The general rule of thumb is usually a train of 4 squares. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and a square on each side. So it could be like this, or it could be like this. It could be like this. It could be like this. But that's the general rule of thumb. And that's how we can identify that those nets would create a cube. I also want to talk about the differences between nets for cubes and nets for prisms versus pyramids. First of all, let's look at this shape right here. Is this a prism or a pyramid? It's a prism. Is this shape here a prism or a pyramid? It's a pyramid. We can identify our solid shapes and identify between pyramids and prisms fairly easily, but what if I only gave you the nets? So we have to figure out if this shape here is a prism or a pyramid. Which one is the prism and which one is the pyramid? Here is the hints. Prisms will often have a bunch of rectangles that go around the sides of these shapes right here. Pyramids will have a lot of different triangles, and then one shape will be different. So for example, I can have a pyramid net look like 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just going to erase this because it looks a little wacky. I can have a pyramid net that looks like this. So it has 4, so I'm going to try to draw this again. 1, 2, 3, 4. I know it's not drawn very well. I'm not an artist. But I can have a pyramid net that looks something like this. Pyramids will have multiple triangles that go around. Because when we have a pyramid as a 3D shape, it has a bunch of triangles that meet up at a corner at the top. And then one shape will be the base of it, but only one. Prisms will have double. So in this case, a triangular prism has 2 triangles and 3 rectangles. Pyramids will only have the one odd shape and the rest will just be triangles. So if I have a prism or a pyramid that looks like this creates a net of a pyramid because I have a bunch of triangles and then one shape that would be my base that looks different. Or I can have a pyramid that's just made up of only triangles that could look something like this. So if it has a bunch of triangles in it though, that's usually the key difference to tell it's a net for a pyramid. Prisms will often have a bunch of rectangles and 2 shapes. So if I were to draw, let's do a hexagon-based prism, that would have, oh boy, this is going to be tough to draw. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, oh boy. 5 and 6, and then I would have another shape. There we go. This would create a hexagon prism. And the reason we know this is because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rectangles that go around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides. So usually there's the same amount of rectangles as there are sides of one of these shapes. So a hexagon has 6 sides, it needs 6 rectangles. And there's 2 hexagons Reason being is you'd have to have a hexagon on each side of the prism, because when it is sculpted, oh boy, I really can't draw. When I have it sculpted, which is a very, very bad drawing, I know, I have a hexagon on this side and a hexagon on that side, and rectangles that go all around the sides. So this is the difference to tell between a prism and a pyramid. So today what you're going to be working on is either circling shapes that would create the nets of a cube, or identifying whether the net will create a prism or a pyramid. All right, make sure to email me if you have any questions whatsoever, and otherwise I will see you on Wednesday.